So we're going to continue our discussion on nested loops, and then we're going to go into something a little bit different. So I've got a couple examples. We got to the point where we talked about, and I have no idea where I got the little star. I don't know what's up with that. Anyway, we got to a point where we discussed basically the format of how you create nested loops and how not to create nested loops. And so now we're going to do a couple of examples. So I'm going to put some code up here. And I mean, obviously, we could type this code inside of IntelliJ, execute it, and see exactly what it outputs. But it benefits us to actually trace the code. And on your next exam, which is coming up pretty quick, you're going to be asked to trace code inside of loops. And so you're going to have to pretend like you're the compiler, right? And you're actually executing the thing. So I'm going to set up an example of a nested loop, and then we're going to trace it line by line and figure out exactly what's going to output from that. So I'm going to create a for loop. Yeah, one of these days I'll go in and correct that in my settings, but probably not today. So we're going to create an integer that I'm going to call I. Not so much procrastination as forgetfulness. Int I, we're going to set it equal to 1 in this case. And then we're going to say I less than 5. And then we're going to increment I as our update statement. What did I do? Come on, can't you guys use your powers of mental telepathy to see through my eyes? It would be so much right, it'd be right, exactly. See the reflection? My son actually said that the other day. I was home with my 3-year-old because my older ones were out at um, religious education class at night, and we were sitting down watching Moana. That's what it was. We were watching Moana, which is awesome, by the way. If you haven't seen Moana, you got to see it. It's awesome. But anyway, I was sitting there, and he was looking at me talking about something, and he goes, "Dad, I see Moana in your glasses." And I was like, "Yes, son. That's called a reflection." He's 3, by the way. Okay, so there is our outer loop. How many times is this loop going to execute? Just by looking at the header. How many times is this loop going to execute? 1, 2, 3, 4. And when it hits 5, it will not execute because it will check the condition statement and it will not enter that loop because I said less than and not less than or equal to. So we'll execute on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when it hits 5, it will not execute the body. So it's going to run 4 times. Just by looking at it, it's going to run 4 times. Those types of questions are going to be on the exam. Hey, given this for loop header, how many times is this for loop going to execute? Right? That could be a question on the exam. Okay, so now let's create the inner loop. Why did I create int j and not int I inside of here? Because int I already exists in our scope, right? Scope works in, it does not work out. So int j, and we're going to say as long as j is less than I. Ooh, that one's tricky, right? J plus plus. And then I guess we actually have to do something inside of here. So inside of here, let's create a let's create a print statement. And we'll print out an asterisk, which is a fun word to say, asterisk. And then outside of the inner loop, we're going to do a print line. Everybody understand the setup? My pen is never where it's supposed to be. It's probably my fault. Okay, so here we go. Let's trace it really quick. So let's talk about output over here. So output of these statements. Here we go. I got to set up some stuff. I got to talk about what I is. I got to talk about what J is at any given time. And then the output's going to be somewhere down here. Okay, so I hit the first for loop. What is the value of I? 1 initially. Right, so I initialize I. And then what do? I initialize I. And then what do? Check the condition statement, right? So I initialize I, and then I check the condition statement. Is 1 less than 5? True. Now what do? Now that the condition statement is true, I execute the body of that loop. And the first executable statement in the body of that loop is the initialization of J. So I'm going to set J equal to 1. Then what do? Check the condition statement inside of the inner loop. Is 1 less than 1? False, right? That's interesting. Okay. So now I'm going to what? Skip the rest of the for loop. And so what do I do next? What happens after I exit this for loop? I hit a print line, right? And so really the first thing that's going to print inside of here is going to be a carriage return line feed, right? So we're going to start on this line, but it's going to print out a new line, and we're going to go to the second line. Okay, so now we've reached the end of the body of the outer for loop. What do we do next? Right, we hit the update statement for the outer for loop. And so we increment I. And so now the value of I is what? Yeah, you guys can count. Good job. So 2. Now what do we do after we've incremented I? We check the condition statement again, right? So now we're going to go condition statement, update statement, condition statement, update statement, condition statement, update statement, right? Until it's false. So 2 less than 5, true. So we're going to enter the body of the outer for loop. And we're going to say for int J is equal to 1. So what's the value of J now? 1, right? Because as soon as I exit that inner loop, J disappears. Its scope goes away. And so even though I had already initialized J to 1 before, that has no bearing on what happens right now because I exited the loop. So J gets reinitialized to 1. Whenever you hit that inner for loop again, it does not automatically go to the condition statement unless we're inside of the loop, inside of the inner loop, right? So now that we've initialized J to 1, we're going to hit the condition statement. 1 less than 2. True, right? So now we get to exit, or we get to execute the body of the inner loop. So we're going to system.out.print an asterisk. And then what are we going to do? We're going to hit the update statement in the inner for loop. So we're going to increment J, which makes it what? 2. And then what are we going to do? We're going to check the condition statement of the inner for loop. So 2 less than 2. False. So what do when the condition statement is false? We were done with that loop and we exit. And so we're going to hit the next executable statement outside of this inner for loop, which is print line. So that's going to bring us to the next line right there. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Now what do we do now that we've reached the end of the outer for loop? Right, we're going to hit the update statement of the outer for loop, and we're going to increment I. So instead of it being 2, it's now going to be 3. And then what are we going to do? Check the condition statement of the outer for loop. 3 less than 5. True. So we're going to execute the body of the outer for loop. First thing we hit is the inner for loop. And we're going to initialize J again. So now what is the value of J? Old value goes away. New value is there. So we initialize J to 1 again. And then what do? Check the condition statement. 1 less than 3. True. So we're going to execute the body. System.out.print asterisk. Yeah, everybody okay? Yep.
is J++ even? Does it do anything?
Oh, sure does. Yeah, if I didn't have it, then it would be an infinite loop after the second iteration of the outer loop, right? So that would mean J would be 1 in this case, right? So J would be 1, and 1 is less than I, so we'd print out an asterisk. 1 is less than I, print out an asterisk. 1 is less than I, print out an asterisk. 1 is less than I, 1, 1, blah, 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 right? Until we run out of memory. So we increment J so that the loop terminates. Yes, sir.
Isn't there a skip line though?
Isn't there a what?
Isn't there a skip line between those two asterisks?
Isn't there a skip line between those two asterisks? Like a new line character?
Yes.
That's what this is, right? So this asterisk was printed on this line, and then we went to the next line in order to print out that one.
I thought we had another print line in between.
Do we? I mean, here's the first one. We should have, here's the first one. We're on the third line. There's been 2 print line statements, so we're on the third line, right? The first one executed without printing an asterisk because 1 was not less than 1. And then the second time the outer for loop ran, we printed out a single asterisk and a new line, right?
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're on the third line, but we've only had 2 print line statements actually execute. All right. So now I've printed the asterisk inside of the inner for loop, right? So I've executed that statement. So what do I do next? So I'm right here, right? So I've just executed that with J being 1. So what happens after I execute the body of the inner for loop? Right. We go back to the update statement, what you wanted to remove. So we go back to the update statement, and we're going to increment J, right? So J becomes 2. And then we check the condition statement, right? So is 2 less than 3? True. So we're going to execute the body of the inner for loop again, and we're going to print out another asterisk. After we do that, what are we going to do? Update. J is now going to be 3. 3 less than 3. False. So that means 3 less than 3. So false. So we're going to exit out of the inner for loop and go to the next executable statement inside of the outer for loop, which is a print line statement. So that's going to bring me down to this next line. After I've executed all the stuff inside of the body of the outer for loop, then I'm going to hit the update statement again. So I'm going to I++. We're going to go from 3 to 4. Will this be my last execution? It will. All right, this is the last one, but we're still going to update everything the way that it will inside the program itself. Right, so 4 less than 5, true. So I'm going to execute the body of the outer for loop. And we create J again, right? We've lost scope. That old value goes away. New value of J gets inserted. And then we're going to check the condition statement. 1 less than 4. That's true, by the way. Just letting you know, 1 is indeed less than 4. Now we're going to execute the body of the inner for loop. We're going to hit the update statement. What just happened? Hit the wrong button. That's what happened. We're going to increment J to 2. And then we're going to check the condition statement. 2 less than 4. True. So we're going to print out an asterisk again. And then we're going to hit the update statement. Increment J to 3. And then we're going to check the condition again. All right, so 3 less than 4, true. So we're going to print out an asterisk. Then we're going to hit the update statement again. J is going to become 4. 4 less than 4, false. So we're done printing out asterisks. We're done with the inner for loop, and we're going to hit the next executable line outside the scope of the inner for loop, which is a print line. So I'm going to be right there. And then I'm going to hit the update statement for the outer for loop, which is going to make I 5. Then I'm going to check the condition. 5 less than 5. False. So now I exit the outer for loop and I go on to whatever comes next. All right, so the output is here. There's my output. That's actually what's going to display to the screen whenever I run this. I could verify it if I wanted to, but I don't want to. Now, inside the body of those for loops can be thousands of lines of code if you want it there to be, right? So as much code as you want to can be inside the bodies of those for loops. But you guys can see what I was warning you about before, and we're using tiny numbers right now. But you can see inside of here that the execution of the inner for loop will execute as many times as the outer for loop does, right? So if the inner for loop executes a dozen times, then it will execute a dozen, 12 times however many the outer for loop executes, right? So be careful whenever you're doing stuff, not to run into too many issues with that. So okay with nested loops? Yeah? All right. Now we get to get into some more graphic fun stuff. So for those of you that are bored by nested loops, I'm about to show you something that you've never seen before. Prepare yourself. Get ready. It's happening. We're going to mess with file input. How many have actually done file input with a programming language? I'm talking about taking a static file that exists on an operating system and doing something with that file. What'd you do it in? But, oh, you did it through batch programming. Okay, gotcha. Well, we're going to do it with Java. And it's, well, I don't know. Batch programming is kind of fun. I used to do that to create executable files back when I was a software developer, right? So you can code executable files through batch programming that run in command line. Okay, but we're going to talk about taking a text file, right, that exists on the operating system somewhere, and we're going to pull that text file into our program so that we can edit it. Now, it may seem a little boring to do something like that, but trust me when I tell you that this occurs constantly, right? So all these little apps that you guys have on your phones, all the local settings and stuff that are inside of there are all being saved inside of individual files that are saved on that operating system, be it iOS or Android, doesn't really make a difference. They're all being saved with individual files. So when we get to Android development next semester, and you guys are creating Android apps like crazy, and you're all going to become millionaires because you're going to be Android developers, you're going to be messing with files all of the time because these apps have to be as fast as they possibly can, and that means minimalizing getting data from a different source, and that source being the internet, right? So it takes a long time to go retrieve something from a server on the internet, but retrieving something from a local file is instantaneous. And so I'm going to lead you guys through, there's a way of doing this that's way more boring than what I'm going to show you. There's a way of retrieving data from a file, but I'm going to show you guys the swing version of it, the graphical way to go get it. And basically what happens is you get displayed a pop-up window that has a file chooser inside of it, right? Just like a normal file chooser where you can browse all of the directories inside of the operating system and find something and say, that's the file that I want. It's pretty cool. So let's talk about it. First off, we're going to need some imports in order to make this work. So these will come automatically if you use IntelliJ, but if not, you're having some errors, you probably forgot an import. Here they are. We're going to import javax.swing.j file chooser. And again, this is why I make you guys do input and output with JOptionPane, because it leads you into this, and then at the end of the semester, it leads you into Java app development where we're using JFrames to create really complicated interfaces. We're going to import java.io.file. That one's kind of boring, actually. And we've got import java.io.file not found exception. And I'll be proper and put semicolons at the end of these. Now, this is the first time that we've actually, is this the first time we've ever run into an exception? I think it is. I think it's the first time that we've run into an exception that can handle, or that can occur inside of your program, usually by user error, right? Yay, users. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to do this. So step one. We're going to construct a file chooser object. So there exists a class called file chooser, which is part of the Java Swing library, and we're going to use that sucker. So creating a file chooser is essentially just like creating any other object, like a string, right? So data type is JFileChooser. And then you can name it whatever the heck you want to, right? So fchooser, whatever. New JFileChooser. Right, so create the object. Now that we've created that object, our chooser object has inside of it all the code that is inside the JFile class. And so now I can start utilizing those methods that are inside of that class in order to make stuff happen. So here we go. Step 2. Call the show open dialog or show save dialog method. See if I can make this riddle fit. Oh, right there. Perfection. So you've got two options with the JFileChooser. One is show open dialog, and one is show save dialog. The only difference between the two is that one of the buttons down at the bottom says open, or it says save, depending on what you want to do, right? So it looks kind of like this. fchooser.show open dialog, and then we're just going to send it null. And again, null just has to do with the parent that's inside of there. So this will opens a file chooser window. Need a little more room inside of there, please. There we go. Opens a file chooser window with an option to open a file. And then the other option, show save dialog. So this one opens a file, chooser window with an option to save a file. Right? So if you're wanting to open a file in order to get the information out of it, you would use the first one. And if someone has manipulated a file inside of your program and you want to allow them to save that file somewhere, then you would call the other one, right? So let's go to step 3. So we're going to check to see if the user clicked clicked open or save, depending on whatever it was, or if they clicked on, there's also a cancel button whenever the window pops up, right? So it's either save or open, and then it's cancel. If they click cancel, we want to do one thing, and if they clicked open, we want to do another, right? Obviously, if they click cancel, they didn't choose something, and so we don't want to take any action because they didn't actually do anything. So we're going to say if the user clicked open or save, then the call to show open dialog will return the following value. So what I'm saying is, if they chose save or open, then the return type of the call to that method is going to be the following. So that is a constant value, right? It is a constant value that is being sent back by the method that's inside of that class itself. And so you're going to have to check for the existence of that return type. So if the user clicked cancel, then they're going to get this as a return type. So you will look for the occurrence of either of those. It is either going to be one or the other, right? And so if one of them doesn't exist, then take the action for the other one. And we'll do an example of that here in a second. So let's look at some code. So here we go. We're going to create a, I don't know, heck, why do this inside of here? Let's do this inside of IntelliJ so we can actually make stuff work and you guys can see it. All right, so let's get inside of IntelliJ. There's some random stuff that we did, whatever. You don't care about that. Let me get rid of swing. All right. So first step is create the JFileChooser instance object. So JFileChooser. Okay, they want to name it FileChooser. New JFileChooser. All right, there's step one. Next step, we're going to create, in order to interact with the file that we're actually going to go out and get, we're going to go back and hark back to an object we talked about before called the scanner, right? So scanner was really good at taking input from a console window and pulling it in and letting us use it. It's also really good at taking input from a file and letting us use it as well, right? So I'm going to create a scanner object. I'm going to call it in. I'm going to set it equal to null initially. And then down here, this is where I'm going to check to see whether or not the user clicked on open. So they want to open a file. So I'm just going to set up a condition statement really quick. It says if FileChooser dot show open dialog. And I'm going to set parent equal to null is equal to, and I'm going to have to split this up into two parts, is equal to JFileChooser.approve option, just like I showed you guys, right? So in other words, they clicked open or they clicked save, but we're showing an open dialog, not a save dialog, so the only option is going to be open, right? So let's just run this as it is right now, so that you guys can see the input dialog. Compile, compile, compile. Here we go. There it is. So this is what you get, right? You can navigate to wherever you want to. Desktop, right? There's some stuff inside of there. I can go to, I don't know, libraries, documents, see what's inside of that. OneNote, notebooks, right? So here's all our notes that are inside of here. In other words, you can navigate wherever you want to and find a file, an individual file. I'm going to have to find one on the desktop. I don't think I've got individual files anywhere else. Right, so there's a link file for TechSmith. So I could say that, and then I would say open. Now, if I click open, then the condition statement is going to be true, and I'm going to execute the body of that condition statement, right, which has nothing inside of it right now. But we can confirm that we're actually executing the body by a breakpoint right there. Oh, I didn't actually put anything inside of there. Let's put something inside of there so I can actually put a breakpoint inside of there. So I'm going to create a file object from java.io. I'm going to call it selected file. I'm going to set it equal to file chooser dot get selected file. So they selected a file. I'm going to go get it. I'm going to put it inside of this object that I called selected file. And then I'm going to do stuff with it after that. But right now, all I'm going to do is make sure that I'm actually getting there. So I'm going to launch this in debug mode with some breakpoints. There I am. Where's my dialog box? Not up there yet. Step 1. There it is. Go to desktop, choose a file, say open, and then when I get back to the code inside of open, I am now inside of file selected, right? So I'm right here on this. I couldn't be in here unless I chose a file that was accurate, and then I put that file inside of selected file. Right, so this call right here actually opens the dialog box. It's part of the condition statement, but it still executes the dialog box and then checks to see whether or not they click the right button, and then we're going to do stuff inside of here. Okay, so now after I get the file inside of my program, I can then do stuff with it. So this is where I'm going to take that scanner object that I created called in and set it equal to new scanner, and I'm going to send to it selected file, right? So I'm going to create a scanner for the selected file. What did I do? Oh, right. So this is where the exception happens that I told you guys about, right? So now I have an exception that can occur. In other words, that file might not actually exist, but in reality, we know it does exist because we wouldn't have been in here if it didn't exist, but we still have to account for the fact that it might not. And so there's two options that you have in order to catch exceptions that occur. So the first option is to make the entire method catch the exception, in which case you add a little thing called throws to it. File not found exception. And then anywhere where it occurs inside of here, anywhere where a file not found exception occurs inside of here, the method will just throw it. The second option that you have to do it, and this one is the preferred method because you can tell exactly where the error occurred, is to wrap it in what's called a try-catch. So a try-catch works like this. So I'm going to get rid of that so it'll throw the error again. And before that statement occurs, I'm going to create a try. I'm going to put that statement inside of the try. And then the next part of a try-catch is catch, right? And I'm going to catch the exception that I know that statement might throw, which is file not found exception. And I'm going to call the exception E. And then I'm just going to say E dot print stack trace, I guess. That'll just print the error to the screen, right? So now I've created this try-catch where I'm going to try to do this thing that might throw an exception. If it does throw an exception, I will execute the catch. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So if it does throw that exception, I will then launch the catch. And I can do whatever I want to inside of the catch. The reason we prefer this one is because now I know exactly what threw the error. If I've got 35 times where I try to access a file inside of this method, and I use the other one that I showed you where I put the throws outside of the method header, then I won't know which specific instance inside of that method threw the error. I just know that somewhere inside of the method it threw it. In this case, I know exactly what threw the error. So I'm going to use try catches for the most part inside of my code. So now that we've loaded the selected file, we can now do things to it, like create an integer that I'm going to call ID and set it equal to in.nextInt. And then I'm going to create another integer called social security number and set it equal to in.nextInt. Now, the thing with using these commands is that you have to know the format of the file that you're dealing with, right? You have to know how the data is laid out inside of the file so that you can manipulate it. I'm looking at a file inside of here where on the first line, I've got an integer, and that integer is an ID number. On the second line is a social security number. So I need to go out and create a file, a text file, that has that data inside of it. So first one's going to be an ID number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second line's going to be a social security number, which has 9 inside of it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? And then I can repeat that. So I've got to understand how my file is formatted. And then I would say file, save as, save it on my desktop as, I don't know, employee info dot text or dat. I'll just call it dat. Employee info dot dat. And so now in here I have absorbed the first ID and the first social security number. And then I can just do a real quick j option pane dot show message dialog null, and I can do ID. I'm going to display ID plus a space, concatenate onto that, SSN, and then that should show ID number, a space, and then the social security number of the first value that was inside of that file. So let's go see if we can make that happen. So we run it. I go to my desktop. I find my, where is it? I find my employee info.dat. And then I say open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so I just, no, thank you. I'm here all night, tip your waitress. So, right, so we just went out to an external file that existed somewhere on the operating system, pulled it into our program, absorbed information inside of that file, and then did something with it. In this case, just formatted a little bit and outputted it to, I don't think outputted is a word, outputs it to the user. You guys okay with that? Now, the assignment that I'm going to give you that deals with files will be way more complicated than 2 lines. And it will also not only include integer values, but integer values, double values, strings, all kinds of stuff inside of there. And so they'll be quasi-complicated, probably 4, 5, 6 objects on a single line. Each line is going to count as one record. And you guys are going to have to absorb that information, understand how that information looks whenever you store it, and then process it in some way. And then we haven't talked about it today, but after you do that, then you're going to have to write the data to a new file and save that new file somewhere on the operating system as well. And we'll talk about how to write data to a file. Oh, it's Friday, so you guys get a weekend before we mess with this again. So we'll talk about it on Monday, how to insert new data inside of a new file.